Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the August Workplace Leaders Series webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm Becky Kirby, the Director of Workplace Innovation here at AgilQuest, and I'll be facilitating today's topic, Change Management, the People-Centric Approach. Our Workplace Leaders Series are monthly educational lectures and panel discussions designed to share expertise and experience from industry experts and frontline workplace practitioners with you, the workplace leaders who are bringing change to both business and government every day. By gathering these experts and bringing you the opportunity to interact and ask your own questions, we hope to make your workplace program more successful and effective. Today's speakers will be sharing key insights and stories regarding the real value of investing in change management when deploying workplace strategies, who the key stakeholders are, the steps required to align the business objectives, workplace strategies, and people for successful programs. Whether you want to reduce real estate costs, increase employee satisfaction, improve user adoption, or all three, today's speakers have much to share and will be valuable to your programs. We've saved time for audience questions at the end of the presentation, so please use your Q&A facility in your WebEx toolbar to submit your questions as you think of them during the presentation. At the end of the prepared slides, we'll answer as many questions as we have time permits. We will answer your questions in the order in which they are submitted, so game on, be the first one to get your questions submitted as our speakers today. We have two really great, well-known industry experts sharing their expertise and experience today. Cheryl Duvall, founder of Avance Consulting, author, speaker, and coach with a real passion for interior design and the important role it plays in shaping behaviors in the workplace. And Cheryl Cavanaugh, founder of Life Meets Work, author, speaker, and advisor, helping organizations take the guesswork out of flex work. For more information about Cheryl and Kira and the great work that they're doing, we have included their full biographies and contact information for your reference in this presentation. You will receive a link in your email in a few days with the link to this recorded webinar and the workplace resources that will be presented today. Now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Cheryl to begin our change management webinar. Cheryl?
Thank you, Becky. Right. Okay. So why do we need change management in the workplace? Well, we need it because change is hard. And I love this quote. Change is hard. Can you go back just one? Change is hard because people overestimate what they have and they underestimate what they may gain by giving that up. And this is a very powerful quote and something I use quite a bit when I talk to people about change. And it's especially true in the workplace when we think about the many facilities, IT, real estate, and HR changes that confront workers with increasing frequency. It's helpful to remember that the reaction to change generally follows a typical bell curve. You'll have a few resistors, as shown here, and a few early adapters, with most everyone else in the middle. And look at what occurs when you implement a successful change management program. You can really shift that graph to many more on the acceptance side. You'll always have a few resistors, but they'll be far more outnumbered by the positive recipients. So why would we invest in change management? Well, the biggest reason is that it adds value for both leaders and staff. First and foremost, it keeps productivity high because an effective change management program keeps staff and leaders focused on their real work. And this occurs because communications are centralized and where everyone knows where to express their concerns and find answers to their questions. This in turn helps to ease their emotional transition to a different work culture and new processes. And then when you consider the cost of retaining even just one or two valuable staff, the return on investing in change management is really a no-brainer. We've also found that staff become more engaged and empowered and begin to consider a broader organizational perspective rather than being narrowly focused on their own needs. And overall, change management, of course, promotes goodwill.
It also helps make your job easier. That's at the end of the day, what's in it for me. It's that as you invest in change management practices, you clear the path and you move resistance out of the way for your overall effort. We find that a lot of times the change management effort you're undertaking may be really large, and Cheryl's going to talk about that in just a minute. But depending on the size of it, you can really get overwhelmed with all the details of the logistical aspects of what's going to have to be done as that change is happening. And really the reason that we're here today talking about change management is to encourage you to think about what are the people-based aspects of that change, so that you're not just heads down dealing with the logistical aspects, but recognizing that whatever change is taking place is going to have impact on the individuals and the teams in your organization, and to anticipate, plan for that, and address it from the very beginning is huge.
And as Kira said, this real focus on the people-centric is really represented in this next quote. So, as architects, we prepare space for the people, but as change managers, we prepare people for the space. And I think that's a real simple way to really think about change management. And when Frank Duffy shared this quote, he observed how architects and designers prepare the space for the people, but often overlook the need for change management. And so any of you attendees of this webinar might want to replace that word architect for who you are and what you represent. So perhaps as facility managers, we prepare a space for the people, and as change managers, we prepare people for the space. So to really think of it in those terms. And the very success of any new project or program that you might be rolling out, as you know, is not just delivering that program on time and within budget, but ensuring that people are productive from day one. And that's what change management does. So how big is your cultural change? It's important to determine the scope and scale of the change management effort early on. And I found it helpful to describe the change management effort according to these 5 levels. So if you look at the first 2 levels, minimal and light, that's really where communications is sort of the focus. It's really just focusing on communications. Maybe it's not a huge cultural change. But when we look at levels 3 to 5, from moderate to comprehensive, we have to think about what's maybe transformational for one organization that might not even raise an eyebrow in another. For example, I recently completed a government project where the changes were new for the staff, but it was very mainstream in other workplaces. So I would call that a moderate level, a level 3. And in that case, they were going to slightly smaller workstations and offices, and they had no boundaries between departments. That happened, decades ago, but for them it was very new. Whereas another organization might be going to activity-based working or 100% open space, and that might be a level 4 or 5 effort. So I usually have these levels to help people sort of anticipate and articulate how extensive their change management effort might be. And with any of these, we have found that it's helpful to have Kotter's 8 steps to creating change on hand. And he's written many books, Leading Change, Heart of Change, Our Iceberg is Melting, to name a few. But in all of these books, these 8 steps are foundational. So the first on the list is establish a sense of urgency. While the announcement of any relocation or a new workplace policy is often very effective in getting people to pay attention, so that's usually the sense of urgency. Next, a guiding coalition is created. Perhaps it's a team of 4 to 6 people is generally the size I see, although that can really vary. And it typically includes leaders from HR, IT, and facilities, and then that needs to have a strong leader overall, someone who is trusted by the CEO that's going to head that guiding coalition. They'll be the key decision makers and will develop the overall vision and strategy, step number 3, for the change management effort. And then once that vision and strategy have been articulated, it's time to begin the communication of the change vision. And I say begin because although this is identified by Kotter as step number 4, this is ongoing throughout the life of the change management process. And it's impossible to think about effective communications without the next step, which is highlighted in red, the empower broad-based action. This gets back to the people-centric part that we're talking about today, where people get themselves immersed in the activities regarding the change. The staff themselves become part of it. Their efforts can lead to short-term wins, which often silence the cynics and the resistors and builds momentum with the supporters. Pilot projects are obvious examples and help us build on those early wins and use the resulting credibility to tackle the actual bigger changes. And then, of course, that final step, anchor new approaches in the workplace. We want to make sure it sticks, right? So this is a very important step not to be overlooked and underestimated. And Kira's going to talk later about the continuous improvement that we see. That's all part of this. So in my work as an interior designer, these change management efforts parallel a design and construction project, but this applies to anything that you might have going on, any project where you've got key milestones and you want to overlay the change management effort alongside of that, so it parallels. And if we start change management early, we can then identify pilot projects and other ways to test new concepts so that the learnings can be applied and then tweaked and refined for ultimate success. And change management must also be absolutely supported at the top, beginning with senior leadership, and they have to visibly and vocally advocate for the change management process. And then we see that the key stakeholders and department leaders have to be kept informed while involving the staff. And when the staff are engaged, they support the change, and we get buy-in at all the levels, which is exactly what we want. And Kira's going to talk more about buy-in.
So if you think about securing leadership buy-in, the most obvious leader is the one who's the sponsor for your change management effort. That's pretty obvious, right? But we strongly encourage you to think much beyond that. So going beyond the silo of the functional leader in charge of your project, who else is going to have influence or say in how things go? One of the challenges that we see is that change management leads will go in and ask senior leaders for their buy-in, make the case for this change, get the budget approved, and think that you're off to the races. But if you're not continually checking in with those senior leaders, especially if your change management effort is going to take a couple of years, those senior leaders can change. Someone who was a supporter has not been kept in the loop and falls out of that circle of support. You can also be encouraging senior leaders to be reaching out to each other to be doing some of that influence so that it's not all on you. So key takeaways in terms of securing leader buy-in, senior leader buy-in is don't just go to the obvious people. Keep that communication flowing on a regular basis and really move to engage them, to give them a sense of specifically what you're looking for from them as they're showing formally and informally their support for your project. So that leads us to communication, right? And again, when you think about the tactical aspects of change management, especially when it comes to workplace redesign or moving to a mobility or flexibility program, the communication that seems most obvious is all of the kind of tactical stuff. When are you moving? What is the new space going to look like? And we often see that communication with floor plans and town halls to engage everyone in the actual move are pretty prevalent. But we do see a preponderance of relying on email and not necessarily a coordinated communication strategy for change management. I put those icons on this slide too because I think that there is a big opportunity for HR and facilities, real estate, and IT all to be working together in tandem. And we've done some work and published some articles about how do you come together to create shared metrics and shared goals so that everybody wins even though each one of these areas of focus are so different and motivated by so many different things. Working primarily in the HR space with HR leaders on mobility and flexibility change, they often won't even know that there's workspace redesign projects going on or considerations of getting rid of buildings, because those are real estate and facilities projects. And so there needs to be horizontal, kind of cross-communication going on as well. And Cheryl, I think you're going to give some great examples next of ways that you've been able to really encourage communication and get two-way feedback going.
Absolutely, and sometimes the stories tell the real message that we're trying to get across. So we wanted to share a couple stories. And this first one is about Howard County government. And this photo shows you the call center, and it was a temporary space that they were going to have to move to. And the county executive told these 463 workers that they would be moving in just 60 short days to this temporary swing space, and that they would be there for 2 years. Their current work environment was a mix of private offices and 64 or 80 square foot workstations, but when they moved here, it was going to only be 25 square foot workstations. So we ended up taking down like the panel in between to make it a 2 by 25 square feet. So it was 50 square feet overall. There were no private offices, and as you can see, really, really, really low panels for complete transparency. And because it was temporary, other than taking down that one panel to make it a little bit bigger for each of the workstations, there was very limited budget for anything else, so no construction and no other workplace modifications. So if you go to the next slide, consider for the moment the reaction of this organization, which included 6 elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, who would be sitting next to each other in dense open plan. So that was going to be a little tough. And some of the photos you see there on the upper left is actually the facility once they moved back in after being in this call center for this short time. But what we needed to do to prepare them for this temporary 2-year stint was we took this change agent committee very early, so representatives of all the departments impacted by the move, and we brought them to the swing space, and we made sure that they had lunch in the on-site cafeteria. So you see that lower right corner is a picture of their Oasis cafeteria that was on-site there because they were going to be a tenant in this building. We knew the food quality was outstanding, and we wanted the relocated workers, we thought they would enjoy having good food on site. So when we took them through and we showed them those 25 square foot workstations that were going to be 50 square feet max, then we took them to eat here. And it was really important because then they went back and told all their work colleagues, yeah, it's open space and yeah, smaller workstations, but oh my gosh, there's this great cafeteria. So we always look for ways that we're going to engage the workers in whatever it is. Another brief story on this, the lower left photo shows a refrigerator. 2/3 the way through the project, 2/3 of the way through the construction process, the workers found out that the refrigerators were being specified with no freezer compartments, and they threw a fit. And management listened, leadership listened, facilities listened, and said, okay, we'll replace them. And the contractor had not placed the order yet, so it got substituted out, and they got their freezers, and they felt like they had a voice in the project, and they won. So all the way through, from the very, very beginning of the project, all the way through the end, with the temporary space and into the resulting space. This next story is about VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, in their Northern Virginia facility. And they were moving to something that was not so, earth-shattering to many companies these days, but it was very big to them. Moving from 40% private offices to 20%. They were going from 96 square foot workstations down to 80 square feet. Their architect was trying to get them to go down to 8 by 8, and as many people on this call know, the average right now is 6 by 8 and getting smaller, but this was huge for them to, as engineers, with all of their large drawings, to go down to only 80 square foot workstations. And furthermore, they weren't going to have any boundaries between their departments, and that was new to them. So, next slide. So what we did for them is that they had a very robust intranet site. We had a very active change agent committee who is responsible for helping to create some of the communications that went in their newsletters and what went up on the site itself, frequently asked questions that were populated each time that we met, which was primarily monthly. But what was a real key finding in this particular change management effort that I think is very unique and one that I've tried to replicate since is that when we found out certain things that they weren't going to get, like they wanted an on-site cafeteria, they weren't going to get that. They wanted a fitness center, but they weren't going to get that either. And so they were upset, and I said, well, let's do something about that. So we formed several subcommittees that you can see there on the lower right, and we said, let's take on those challenges and let's propose solutions. And out of that came maybe a conference room could be reserved early for yoga. Maybe a running trail could circle the parking lot. Maybe local food vendors could come in certain days and set up in the break room and have pre-prepared wraps or salads or other things. So we involved the staff in trying to come up with a solution so that they weren't just bitter and resentful, but first we made them understand, why it was that the budget didn't allow for those things and why they couldn't have it, but what could we do that would help address their concerns. So we involved them in as many ways as we could. And then this last story for mine, and then Kira will have a few, is this particular one, which HanesBrands, Inc., which really emphasizes what happens if change management begins very early in the process. Because the biggest advantage is the opportunity to test concepts and ideas in one or two pilot projects prior to risking significant cultural change concepts in a much bigger and broader scale. So this CEO wanted to eliminate silos and force collaboration between departments. And so he said, I want to go down to 0 private offices. They actually went down to 11, but they had a staff of 2,200 people that were giving up 840 private offices. So it was a very huge change. But he insisted on a pilot project to test his ideas. So next slide. So we identified 2 pilot areas totaling 33,000 square feet that were sizable enough to test not only some of the furniture selections and sizes, but also the colors and finishes. The time was really of the essence since the rest of this construction and renovation project needed to proceed, which was about 500,000 square feet total. So the CEO charged the facilities team with designing and executing these pilot projects in less than 3.5 months from beginning to end to installation. It was just amazing. We called it 100 days and 100 nights because that's what it took for the team of designers and furniture manufacturers and contractors and everybody to make the CEO's demand a reality. But then what happened, and it was a good success, and then we kept tweaking as we kept going so that we'd design an ultimately wonderful facility. But what we didn't anticipate at the very beginning was that that CEO was leaving, and 2 CEOs followed. So we had 3 CEOs in 3.5 years. And what was really interesting is that CEOs number 2 and number 3 were not fans of the very open environment that CEO number 1 wanted. But by the time they arrived, which was 1 year after the pilot project, the people themselves, the staff themselves were so excited about the changes that the new leadership couldn't change the tide because it was working. The pilots were essential to securing their early buy-in and making it stick. And so that's, again, one of the best examples, I think, of people-centric, people-involved, people getting back to the new CEOs going, you know what, we like it this way. So, Kira, I know you have other things to add here.
Yeah, thanks. So when Cheryl was sharing that idea of top-down, bottom-up communication and the relationship of both the grassroots kind of consensus building and support and excitement around the change at the same time that you've gotten senior leader buy-in and there's this communication going up and down, I would encourage you to think that communication and your change management approach also needs to go across, so top, down, and across. And you probably don't hear about that horizontal across very frequently. So I want to share in the next few minutes our approach to engaging both teams and managers in change management processes. On the next slide, please. Why is that important? It's important because, like I said earlier in some of my comments, structural changes actually can negatively impact teams. And you need to be thinking about that and planning for it in advance. Now that, for some of you, may feel a little touchy-feely, and you may have the marching orders to move forward with this. And yes, of course, an open collaborative work environment is going to impact teams. That's the entire point, right? Like Cheryl said, well, they were breaking down walls to force collaboration. I say force, CEOs say encourage. And what it does in the work we've done with teams, especially in open collaborative work environments, is it creates a lot of confusion and ambiguity about what are the new rules. I don't know anymore. Can I reserve a conference room or the same cube or workspace 3 days in a row, or am I going to get in trouble for that? And you may have even issued rules about how the space should be used. Then we all know that there are squatters that someone's going to actually have to have a conversation with, that they can't be sitting in their favorite spot in the sunny window every single day. It sounds minute and silly, especially in the scale of some of the projects that you all are working on, but it matters. And it creates dynamics within teams where the apple cart is upset a bit. There's a CPG manufacturer from Chicago, in the Chicago area, that a number of years ago did one of the pilots that Cheryl was suggesting. In this case, it was to create open collaborative spaces, and they made the walls and the floor really bright colors. And I knew someone who was working in the space at the time, and what happened was the team actually started to split up, where they had been working as a very cohesive, collaborative unit. Once they were moved into this space and the rules were gone, and no one had really helped work through with them what the opportunities were for re-engaging and renegotiating kind of what their team norms were going to be, everyone dispersed. And over time, the team became much less effective and was eventually disbanded. And the individual that I knew who was the leader of that team said, no one told us. They put us in this space. They told us how to move into this space. But nobody told us how we should interact in the space or help us think through that. So that's what we're going to talk about. On the next slide, you'll see Boston College Centric for Work and Family, Life Meets Work, my organization, and Career Life Alliance Services. We all got together. Can you change the slide, please? We all got together and we did a study over about 2.5 year period of time that we published in January. You can take a look at the study at workplaceplex.org. And what we did in that study was to test out with 3 different organizations: the Minnesota Department of Transportation, Ryan LLC, an accounting firm based in Texas. I'll tell you more about them in a few minutes, and MedImmune, which is a biotech company that's now part of AstraZeneca. In any case, we studied with them workplace change, and in this case it was flexibility and mobility efforts. So what we did was we took this team-based approach to dialoguing about change and trained them on this approach, and the idea was basically that managers were encouraged to engage in a conversation with their teams. They were trained to do this, to have a conversation with their teams so that they could negotiate the rules of the road, to create a set of norms and rules. It sounds prison-like, but it wasn't, around which they were all going to behave in flexible and mobile teams. But we've also done this with other organizations in open collaborative work environments. And what we found was across the board that as managers were trained on how to have these conversations and employees were engaged in the rule setting around how they were going to work in these new ways, managers saw improvements in productivity and in customer service. So actually business-based benefits, not just touchy-feely, how do we all feel about working in this new space, but actually are in these new ways, that actually productivity and customer service improved. They felt more comfortable working in these new ways, and they felt that their team actually functioned better. Employees, even though they were never trained, just by having a conversation with their manager, felt that the support that the organization had for their work-life needs were improved, and that there was less of an emphasis on overtime and 24/7 availability and less emphasis on face time. Those fears that many of us have when we think about working virtually or working flexibly. At that workplaceflex.org site, you can also watch some videos of managers talking about the process and some of the surprise benefits that they experience. On the next page, this is what we lovingly call our Dora map. If you think about, X marks the spot, you start in the lower left-hand corner, and you're on this journey to the future of work. Well, what is the future of work? The future of work is the end game of the change that you're imparting, right? So it can be any number of things. What we see more and more is the establishment of global teams. It's the merger of two organizations who have to merge their cultures and their workspace and everything else. It may be a mobility initiative. It may be a flexibility initiative. We know that the future is what you all are trying to manage the change toward. And so when we think about that in the context of team, what we call team dynamics, now we call team alignment, there are really 6 different kind of vulnerable places, 6 different areas where I would encourage you to have managers be talking with their teams. And the first is performance. How are we measuring performance, and what are the expectations we have around the performance and the behaviors so that we can build trust with each other, that work is getting done. What is happening in terms of capacity and resiliency? We're all overworked. We have way, way, way too much to do. It's across the board with every organization we work with. We hear it, and it's cutting into our ability to be resilient, both as individuals, as teams, and as organizations. And so by understanding how to monitor burnout, how in the case of the CPG company I was talking to you about, there should have been some sort of measurement, right, or some sort of check-in point to determine if this team was really getting beaten down by what was supposed to be such a positive change. When and where we work, really having open dialogue about the value to the team and to the individuals and to the business, to your clients, your customers, about why are you making this workplace change, work process. So if we're moving where or how we work, if we're changing that, have we really looked at work processes beyond just moving file cabinets or assigning lockers? Are we really taking a good hard look at meeting management and how inefficient meetings are? Are we really looking at email strategies and trying to save time? And communication. How does the change that you are overseeing impact the day-to-day communication that is taking place within and outside of those teams? And then team building. Every time I speak with a group of people now, I ask, how many of you are actively, and I mean on a weekly basis, investing time in building relationships with people you work with? And almost no hands go up. I always joke that depending on the size of the group, there are always 3 hands. So if your leadership is looking for the workplace change that you're overseeing to be improving collaboration, to be improving trust, to get people to talk to each other, it is not going to happen only by focusing on the actual structure of the workplace, by assisting teams with the conversation around how they're actually going to use the space to improve communication or to improve collaboration. You're not going to see the results you want. And in many cases, we see then after that change has taken place and there are some issues with it, then we have to come back in on the back end and do some triage. So on the next slide then, I just wanted to share what does that mean then in terms of training? When you think of training, I'm sure you've got a long, long laundry list of all of the things that need to be trained on. And so there's all of that training. Then we find that leaders, so everyone from a line supervisor all the way up through your organization, may have skill gaps, what HR people call competencies. There may be skill gaps in knowing how to delegate work, in having difficult conversations, in being able to clearly set and manage expectations and hold people accountable. So beyond just the training for how to make this shift, this change happen, we really encourage you to be working with HR to be thinking, what are those skills that leaders at all levels in the organization are going to need to have to make this change successful and to be building training programs in at the time. If communication and trust has broken down in the culture, then be working on that. Encourage. It's a great way to engage HR people in your effort, which you may or may not want to do, I know. But you can get them involved without blocking your efforts by encouraging some training. And then really we do training on the specific team-based conversations. And I'll share more about that with you if you're interested at the end of this webinar. And then the last really best situation, but it's an evolution, is to get all of these topics built into ongoing training programs. So there's another silo that I would encourage you to be reaching out to, people in learning and development, not only to make sure that they've got learning available for people that are moving into the workplace change, but that they're also building on an ongoing basis the leadership skills and competencies so that the change you're making isn't just transactional change at that time, but long-lasting into the future. And then the last topic, before I wrap up then, on the next slide, Becky, I think you wanted to talk about Agile real quick, and then I'll wrap up after that.
Sure. Thank you, Kira. Yeah, I just want to mention real quick thank you. Your point about training is so critical. It's really, really very critical that we want to talk about the Agile Work series of training courses that are shown here. They include a variety of topics that relate to work practice, workplace, work process. And with these modules designed specifically to focus on the diverse training needs for executives, managers, managing distributed teams, and the individual team members working in a distributed work environment. These training modules are multimedia. They're fully customizable. They are 508 compliant, and they've been translated into 11 different languages. And best of all, they're infinitely scalable, quickly and easily deployable, and allow you to deliver a consistent message to your vision and to your teams regardless of where they are working. So this will be available. You can click on the button at the top right-hand corner when you receive this presentation in your email and actually see a free demo on these training training sessions. So welcome to go take a look at the free demo. Kira, you can go ahead. Thank you very much.
Sure. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So really quickly, I thought I would just share two examples of how we put this team alignment approach that across horizontal we were just talking about into action. So the National Sporting Goods Association is a team of about between 20 and 25 people, and they were looking at moving to, they'd been leasing a building a couple of years ago, and they decided that they were really interested in actually purchasing a building, and they wanted to determine how much space they were actually going to need, and it was really going to be dependent on whether or not they could get a mobility or work from home program in place. And so what we did was worked with them on this team-based approach long before they had to make a decision about whether they were going to up their lease or actually purchase property. And so what we did was engage the whole team. We trained the entire team in a one-day workshop on this process of all of these decisions that they needed to make about how they were going to work together successfully when they couldn't all be in the same office in the same location at the same time, to make sure that we were actually improving trust and improving collaboration and not having that be kind of the negative impact. So what we did then was, after we trained them, the teams broke into sub-teams around those 6 different tools. So one group of people worked on how are they going to make sure that their relationship stayed strong even during this change and afterwards when they were working in these new ways. Another group focused on communication, another one on performance. So then they all came back together. I assembled what they had documented and put it in place. And almost 2 years later, they're still using it as a guiding document. They used that document as a way to get approval from their board to make sure that they were going to be able to offer work from home opportunities for all of their employees ongoing. So it was a great way to shore up a lot of that team structure and align the team in a way that prepared them for a move and that benefited them in the meantime. They could start practicing some of those things before the move actually took place. Ryan was a participant in the study. They have since, they're in the process of mandating that every one of their teams, whether they're working flexibly, virtually, in an open collaborative work environment with teams around the world, team members around the world, they require every team to put together this plan, this document of how they are all going to work together. They have shown that internally that their functioning teams that have already started the process during the pilot improved tremendously. So they really see it as a way to create transparency, not only to shore up the change that they've been in the process of making over the last few years to really have performance be all about the metrics that you deliver and not FaceTime and all the old-fashioned ways of thinking about how people perform. So I think the next slide is Becky. I'm sorry, Cheryl?
Yep. So Kara and I have shared a few different ways to involve the staff, and one of the things we want to leave everyone with is that the possibilities are endless. So the team projects that Kara's been talking about, you know, the peer-to-peer sharing. One recent project I worked on, for the first time we did a time capsule that had not been done before, and typically we think of time capsules being exterior, but these people came up with the idea to place a time capsule within the interior wall of the space. So we had the architect work to incorporate this time capsule, and we had each department submit one item to be placed in it. So again, every organization is different, and so just think of different ways to engage the staff and really use their own ideas and their interest level to help direct possibilities here and make it very people-centric. Next slide, I think, Kara, you're going to talk about the loop.
Yeah, so Cheryl and I, when we were preparing for this, really agreed that what becomes important is not to just look at the change management efforts that you're undertaking as a beginning, middle, and an end, but that it needs to start early and continue ongoing, so that exactly what Cheryl was explaining happens, that you can have CEOs change, but that doesn't undermine your change management efforts at the end of the day, because not only have you communicated, engaged stakeholders and staff and everybody else in the launch, but you've communicated, you've offered training, you're measuring the impact, the positive benefits of the change, you're providing feedback at all levels, and then you're making a continuous improvement. So what needs to be different and what needs to be changed based on that feedback, that launches another change management effort. And so really, I think a key takeaway from today is to not just look at all the things on your plate right now in terms of what you're trying to influence, but to really see this as an ongoing process.
And as we wrap up, we wanted to share a couple of insights that the two of us have had, and this one's our top 5 change management mistakes. Number 1, not building change management into your project approach or starting it way too late. So that's number 1. Anytime any organization's going through cultural change, and again, what does that mean for them? To absolutely build in the change management process. Number 2 is too narrowly defining or not engaging the stakeholders. Like really understand who the stakeholders are and figure out a way to engage them. So if we define that too narrowly, we're really missing the mark. Number 3, missing the impact of the workplace redesign on team norms and interactions. So any kind of change is going to impact that. So overlooking that or not understanding that can be a real mistake. So paying attention to what is going to change. It takes a long time to form new habits, right? We all know when we move our residences how difficult that can be on us. So really trying to think in the future and understand what changes are going to be there. Number 4 is very related, underestimating the significance of the change and the potential resistance you might encounter. So again, getting people involved helps that. And then number 5, we all say, you cannot over-communicate, and we really do believe that. So thinking that you've communicated enough. Well, I told them. Well, did you tell them 3 times? Did you tell them 300 times? Did you tell them many different ways? So there's got to be a lot of different ways to communicate the messages.
So wrapping up, putting it in a package with a nice bow on the top, Cheryl and I created 8 critical components for effective change management. So the first is really to develop and communicate a clear vision and goals, and to make sure that it isn't that vision and goals aren't created in a vacuum, involving stakeholders right from the very beginning, even before the effort starts, to understand what are their needs, what are their concerns, get into the negative, get to their fears so that you can really plan to overcome that resistance. Understand the level of engagement. They may be interested today, but you may lose them tomorrow, and your change management plan needs to incorporate that. Involve stakeholders that are not obvious stakeholders. Ask people far outside of the realm. Maybe someone in legal wants to be involved and you never even thought about it. The more stakeholders from whom you gather feedback, the more robust your change management plan is going to be, and the better your life is going to be at the end of the day. Number 3, integrate feedback and build a strategy. Don't just jump in, take the time. And I know many of you are probably working under really tight deadlines. It's worth it to take the time up front to build a strategy. As Cheryl shared, take a top-down, bottom-up, and as I was talking about, a cross approach to change management, and integrate tactics into project schedule and plans. Hold everyone accountable. Create visibility for all of the work that is going to be done so that everyone understands, and doesn't pepper you with questions of, well, why isn't this done and when is it going to be done? Get on the front end of that and be proactive. As Cheryl said, number 6, communicate, communicate, communicate. We cannot stress that enough. Lots of different ways. Like Cheryl said, you got to communicate a lot, but also try all different mechanisms. Take that old advertising idea that you want impressions. You want people bumping into this information wherever they go. Develop that feedback loop we were just talking about, and then continue to engage stakeholders throughout the process.
And so now I think we're ready for Q&A. Becky?
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Cheryl and Kira. That was really, really great. We've got some questions rolling in. If you haven't submitted your questions yet, now would be a great time to go to the Q&A section and submit your questions. We've got a couple that have come. We've got several that have come in. I'm going to go ahead and ask one of the first questions that have come in for you ladies. What is your recommendation on the change priorities? Should we do it all at once or in phases?
Well, I can, this is Cheryl. I can sort of re-emphasize, I think, my suggestion and our suggestion for pilot projects. So if there are things that can be done early, and that so you can establish some priorities and say, can we test some of these ideas, even if it's in a small way. Sometimes in workplace design, it's a mock-up workstation or a mock-up area rather than an entire pilot project that I shared with HanesBrands Inc. I mean, to do a pilot project of 33,000 square feet is awesome when you can do that, but not every project has that possibility. So anytime that you can take anything in a smaller piece and then test the ideas so that then you can tweak it and do that continuous loop improvement we were talking about, that's awesome. So that's one way that you can do that. But if the question's really more about do you hold back from people on the messages about the change, we typically say get that information out there so that you understand how people are responding to it, and you understand where their concerns and challenges are so that you can address them early. So early is always good. I've never known early not to be good.
Great.
Well, and this is Kira. I was just going to say, if it's an issue of looking at how many things, the sheer scale of what you need to be including in a change management plan, I would just encourage you to think about, quick, easy wins, weigh those against some of the longer term, bigger investment wins, and then think about impact. So if you want what one of our clients calls shiny shinies, you always want there throughout the change management process to be little very visible wins that didn't cost a lot of time or money or effort on your part, but that get people engaged early while you're heads down getting some of the bigger, longer-term wins accomplished.
Great. Thank you very much. The second question that came in, it says, when teams begin to telework, in order to reduce space, do you find benefits to having people come into the office on the same days, or do teams try to spread out across the week?
Yeah, so it's interesting because teams have a life and a rhythm of their own. And generally when we encourage teams to work that out, every team's going to come up based on their business function, based on how much of their work really has to be site-based. Teams are going to come up with their own rules, right? I would say if I were going to generalize, usually teams will pick one day where everyone's going to be in the office so that they can be meeting, doing whiteboard activities and things. Even if they don't actually put that into place, the rhythm that I tend to see happen, it certainly happened at National Sporting Goods Association, is that they start to use in-office days as meeting and collaboration days. And then the days that they're outside of the office, they're doing individual kinds of heads-down work or field work or phone work so that they're maximizing the together time and then maximizing the separate time.
Thank you. All right, so the next question we have in queue is, it says, if this is not currently built into the project process, how much additional time should we be planned to accommodate change management services?
Okay, this is Cheryl. I can take a stab at that. Typically, you have to determine, are you using the internal or external resources? And if internal, then anticipate, how many hours that person or persons, team, might need to devote to that. And if you line it up against whatever schedule that you're looking at with the milestones and make it parallel, then you can start to anticipate how long these kind of things will happen. So if a project has already started, and I have entered change management programs far into a project. In the case of that VDOT project, the architectural team was already on the job for a year before they realized that the change management effort was needed because the staff was resisting that going down to an 80-square-foot workstation. So I was brought in a year afterwards. So we had to scope out the change management fees and process. We also, so there was my fee, but there also had to be the time and effort of the people themselves. So I anticipated how many hours a week or a month that the change agent committees themselves, there were 18 people on that committee, would need to be involved, and we met mostly monthly. But then those subcommittees I mentioned also came out of that. That was probably 2 years into the project before that happened. So some of it is addressing approximately how many hours so that managers know how long their people might be needed for something, that leaders can anticipate what their needs will be, but try to disperse it and make it something that's reasonable, but again, listening to the organization themselves and making sure that you're budgeting the time and the resources appropriately so it can be managed. But I will say starting at the beginning is obviously great, but certainly if it enters a year, in that case it was a 4-year-long project, so we entered change management, didn't start for a year into it, but it was able to be handled that way. So I hope that answers the question. Kara, you might have another thought on that.
No, I think that that's a great way to approach it.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Our next question is, What do you recommend for an approach to a global rollout with thousands of people involved?
This is Cheryl. I can take a stab at that too. I have not had an opportunity to be involved in a global rollout as yet, although I have been involved in rollouts where they're piloting we're working with a law firm right now that's piloting some real critical cultural changes, which includes coming down to a third of the file space that they currently have. So a bunch of lawyers are going down to just one-third of physical file space, as in addition to many other cultural changes they're doing, but this is a really huge one for them. And they're using one site to be the first attempt at this, and then they're viewing that as a pilot, and then they'll start rolling it out to their other, 23 other sites, so across the globe. So that's with regard to a couple of the initiatives. So breaking it down into smaller pieces, again, the pilot part of it and testing these new concepts and ideas is extremely critical, I would think, before you're rolling it out globally. And then in terms of anticipating, again, the effort that's involved, if you use the pilot project with involving the stakeholders and how the change management program itself was done. So you're piloting not just the workplace strategies, the new ways of working, but you're also piloting the change management program itself so that then can be replicated across each of the locations that's going through the change.
This is Kira. I would just jump in. I think it's about creating levels of contact. So think about gathering feedback, creating ways to get information at each one of the local offices within the global organization, having a lead either at a regional level or at a country level, depending on how many of those there are. And then that lead is in charge of all of the kind of local change management efforts. So it may be tactical things like translation if the budget's tight and you're not hiring outside translators. It could be running surveys, getting feedback, organizing town halls at a local level. So just figure out at what level you need to be rolling up to leads and then be communicating and connecting and coordinating with those leads on a regular basis. Some global projects we're meeting with teams every 2 weeks. Some it's every month. It just depends on the length of time. But it's sort of the divide and conquer approach because you certainly want to make sure that you're getting information and feeding information in a real customized way at the local level.
Great. Thank you very much. The next two questions kind of tie together a little bit, and I think this probably will be the last two questions. The first question is kind of around, have you been able to prove to managers that they don't have to see butts in seats to prove functionality and productivity? And that kind of ties to the next question about are there any metrics that indicate how much productivity is affected by workplace change and how much change management can change those metrics?
Yeah, it's really, this is the heart of the issue, right, especially when it comes to things like telework. We were with a client yesterday on a call, and they were saying, well, this is all great stuff, except, I report into someone who just is never going to say yes. So I'm going to answer this question as simply as I can because it's pretty complex and really real. So first of all, I think it's recognize where you are and where your leadership is on this issue. We won't have a magic wand, and for some people, you're going to have to focus where you can get where you have the best chance for converting them, right? I think to make the issue of telecommuting one where you're proving exactly what you were saying, the benefits to the organization is key. And then what does that mean? How do you prove it, right? So when you think about metrics and the effectiveness of telework, working from home, working in third places, wherever, when you think about it, most people go straight to productivity. Well, we're worried that productivity is going to decrease? Well, first of all, as long as productivity stays the same or increases, it's a win. Second of all, I start to dig really deep. It's going to be next to impossible, I've found, in 7 years of working on this issue, to get to one common definition of productivity. So I would go back to that leader and say, what is it? How is it that you define productivity? Because everyone defines productivity differently. Productivity is a big, lofty word that floats around in the sky. What are the specifics? Is productivity reducing defects? Is it using your time better? Is it serving clients better? Is it not being absent as often? So get the leaders to really hold their feet to the fire and say, what do you mean by productivity? And then at that workplaceflex.org site that I was telling you about, you can actually see the study. And there are pages and pages of metrics about the value of really letting people, I don't like that term, enabling people to work this way. So what we found is, throwing out a couple quick metrics, 55% of managers who went through the process and planned ahead felt that communication improved. 53% felt interaction improved. 24% said customer service improved. That may be a productivity measure. And 20%, when we just said, did productivity, as defined in this general term, did it improve? And 20% said yes. So that was just our study. There are plenty of other studies out there where you can, even just Googling it, you'll see more and more examples of, and usually, very often, they're self-reported. So do you feel that productivity went up? The work we do with teams is we actually ask them to pick a metric. So in Cheryl's idea of a pilot, the beginning of the pilot, pick a metric, absenteeism. Over a 6-month period of time, did you see absenteeism go up or down? You can start to collect success stories from each one of those teams, put them all in a lovely PowerPoint deck, present it to your senior leadership, and impress them. Because even at a local level, if they can see that there's value and then improvement, you'll get that much closer to influencing and changing their mind.
Wow, thank you guys. Thank you, Cheryl and Kira, so very, very much. This has been really so very informative. I want to thank both of you for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with us today. We also want to thank you for the audience for attending today this webinar and asking such really great questions. It's been very, very informative. I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and that you will receive a link via email so you can reference these great resources that were shared today, and feel free to share today's excellent presentation with others in your organization. Also, keep an eye in your email inbox for details on the next Workplace Leaders Series webinar and our larger educational event, the Agile Workplace Conference, which is scheduled for September the 23rd in Arlington, Virginia. Until then, thanks again from all of us here at AgilQuest, and have a great day.